Am I the only one who is ashamed of the fact that every time I turn on the television and I hear about a party gone awry and somebody pulling out a gun and shooting somebody, 95 times out of 100, it seems, the perpetrators are Black? Is that a real political flaw, or is it a virtue to have a sense of deference to and respect for the decent sensibility, not the racist sensibility, but the decent sensibility of your fellow citizens and to want to show the best face? I don't know. Do you think John Haidt, John Haidt, Coddling of the American Mind and
Mhm.
all of that, structurally stupid, how collective political processes can result in bad outcomes, even, the adverse effects of social media and of the mobile phone culture and whatnot. And I mean, some kind of social psychological account of why it is that we seem, many of us, unable to hold two thoughts that are not contradictory at all, but that are interestingly in tension with one another. Hold them in mind. I guess I think a couple of things. I mean, is it really such a bad thing to say that there's something wrong with Black people? Let me try to defend that. No, what I mean is, what did Malcolm X say when he said, "You've been hoodwinked, you've been bamboozled"? You American Negro. What was the critique? What was the radical critique of the middle of the road Negro aspiration, civil rights, conservatism, church-based? Don't get too much up in their faces. It was a balled-up fist, and it was the voice of liberation, which was Black people, free yourselves from the mental encumbrances of the servant mentality or slave mentality or whatever like that, and make yourselves. There was something wrong with you when you were bent in a crouch. When you stood up with your shoulders back and you took responsibility for your own security, you were fixing what had been made wrong with you by the process of your own enslavement or whatever. So it's like the real issue is agency. The real issue is not that we're pristine and perfect and beyond the possibility of improvement or without fault or flaw or encumbrance or injury. The real issue is, are we or are we not the masters of our fate and the captains of our souls?
Yeah. It's like some of it is just how you market it, I guess, because with Malcolm X, the critique of the community was acceptable because it was coming from a searing hatred of whiteness and what it did. And my true sense of what happened to create Omar was that, one, the countercultural attitude, which starts with whites, meant that a critical mass of especially educated and influential white people started fetishizing being against the man. And that really fed into what was going on in, for example, the Black arts movement and the birth of the Black Panthers, as opposed to SNCC, help me, Glenn, Student Nonviolent Coordination Conference, or was the N something else?
Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Coordinating Committee, yeah. And so you switch from that to the Black Panthers. All that's of a piece. The reform of welfare laws to make it easier to get on and stay on welfare was led by well-intentioned white people. That's Francis Fox Piven and Richard Cloward. I'm not trying to make them into devils the way some people have, but they were responsible for this. The war on drugs is one half trying to get at the hippies, one half trying to get at the Blacks. That was straight up racism in itself. That's white people. And so all of that coming together during that terrible time ends up creating a situation where an Omar grows up in a community where acting like a damn fool is considered maybe not ideal, but one way of being that isn't great, but you still love Omar, and there are lots of other Omars, and this is the way it is, and maybe it has to be this way because racism is around, and so how perfect do you expect us to be? Don't bother us with your respectability politics. That's what creates that. And it's so hard to talk about those things. How do you talk about a change in a cultural mood? It's not quantifiable. A statistician can't get at it. Larry Bobo can't, find the numbers for it, and he wouldn't want to anyway. But there are changes in cultural moods. The welfare revolution is hard to cover because it was different in every city. The war on drugs is a little easier, but I think that's what happened. It's not anybody's fault, but it does mean that Omar is a mess. And it's not because society here in 2023 doesn't love him, which is unfortunately what I think a lot of people want us to say. Just not true.
Is it because his dad is not home and is part of the household that's raising him up and her?
Yep. And dad's not around partly because of the war on drugs, partly because dad grew up in an atmosphere where being respectable held less of a pull upon fewer people than it would have in even the most depressed Black communities in the past. And that's not Omar's father's fault. Omar's father's, his name is Clifford. It's not Clifford's fault. It's all he knew.
Okay. What about the politics? By which I mean, how are we expecting to appeal to our fellow citizens who, unlike you and me, do not feel a family connection to Omar? I speak for myself, but I dare go out on the limb and say that you have a certain sense of identity as a Black man, and the reason that you spend so much time engaging these issues in part because you care about what happens to, quote, your community, close quote. But you can obviously tell me that that's wrong if it's wrong. But
very much do. I have Omar cousins. I've seen Omar. Yeah.
So what about the people who do not have a predisposition to sympathy for Omar? What about the people who are afraid of him? The ones that Scott Adams, yeah, a lot of people and don't want to live near him, want to cross the street when they see him coming, don't want to invest if they think there's going to be too many of him hanging around, kind of like that, whose votes have to support any public undertaking. You know, is there a respectability politics aspect to the Black community wanting to rein in the excess behavior of our youth because they are creating a circumstance in which it'll be very, very hard to persuade our fellow citizens to stay with us and invest in and stay the course on. Is there any foundation for a politics that's going to sound like apologia? I know that it's bad. I know how bad it looks. You know, and even these sermons. You know, you can give a fiery sermon like Ray Nutter, the former mayor of Philadelphia, did. Went into a church after they, you know, this is 10, 15 years ago. There was some stuff that was going on, but a bunch of kids doing stuff, getting on public transit and messing with people or whatever they were doing. And Nutter sort of dressed down. He said, your parents, if you don't take responsibility for your kids, we're going to come looking for you and we're going to lock you up, or words to that effect. He called it nonsense. He started talking about curfews and he started talking about, you know, and he was in a church and everybody was saying, amen, amen, amen. And I thought at the time, A, it's going to be just about as effective as Bill Cosby's campaign. But B, maybe his audience isn't the Black community. Maybe his audience is the rest of Philadelphia. And he's trying to tell them, you know, I got your back. And then I thought, would it have been crazy if that had been what was going on? Or would it have been shrewd?
Mm-hmm.
And I know what the anti-respectability politics answer is, you know, which is those are racist. You're going to, you know, genuflect and bend over backwards to try to look good for them when they don't give a damn about you anyway, and all they're looking for is an excuse to turn their backs, and you know, stuff like that. But some of this behavior is shameful. Am I the only one who is ashamed of the fact that every time I turn on the television and I hear about a party gone awry and somebody pulling out a gun and shooting somebody, that the, you know, 9 times out of 10 or 95 times out of 100, it seems, you know, the perpetrators are Black. You know, is that a real political flaw, or is it a virtue to have a sense of deference to and respect for the sensibility, the decent sensibility, not the racist sensibility, but the decent sensibility of your fellow citizens, and to want to show the best face? I don't know.
There's something someone said. Some white man of influence, maybe in sports, I think he said it in the 90s. You might be able to identify this. He said, the problem with Black culture is there's no shame in failure. You remember when someone said that?
No, I don't.
It was definitely, I'm making up the first half, but no shame in failure. We could Google whoever said it. And their career was over in a second, I seem to recall. And I remember hearing it and thinking the sad thing is that he's onto something. It's not that there's no shame. It's that there's less. There's a guiding tacit sense among a great many Black people that when it comes to Black failure, it has to be understood on some level because of the operations of structural racism. And in a way, that's almost too sophisticated. It's a very post way of thinking of things because there's some truth in it. Yes, that might be true to an extent. But beyond a certain point, and that point, is bypassed way too much, there is a sense that being Omar is not the best thing, but we have to understand that it's going to be a norm because racism. And that's to decry that, to say that that's abnormal is considered respectability politics. But I think that's just local to our moment. It's a problem. I genuinely think that it is an excess of sophistication in a way. It is a very advanced insight to say, this person failed, but you have to kind of see it as because of a very abstract but powerful structural barrier that this person dealt with. And that's why Omar is seen as, to an extent, to humanize it even more. There's a bit of people who think of Omar as a soldier. The Wire was good at depicting that. Omar is at least kind of girding himself up and rebelling against all this racism. At least he's not just laying down. He's doing what Malcolm X said. Omar often has a Malcolm X t-shirt. But none of this gets us anywhere is the problem. It's too sophisticated.